At scale, there are tons of different types of problems, tons of patterns, and it's hard to deterministically figure out each part.
It's great to explore these really hard problems, but to productionize, you do have to think about what are the things that I might not expect from this domain.
It's tempting to build general abstractions and general tools and infrastructure, but there's a real cost associated with it, and the more specific opinionated you can be about workflows, it's much easier to build a system.
How do you get users to understand the product that you've built? Because that's just as important than actually building it.
The next panel is about building AI products, not prototypes. A few seconds ago, we heard how there's a demo on Twitter, 5 demos on Twitter a day, probably a higher number. And it's a very fascinating path to go from a prototype that looks really flashy, works 20% of the time, and you can highlight those use cases, to actually build a product that is adding consistent value to the customers. There are not many of those today, but we will hear from some of the most successful ones on this panel. On this panel, we have Aiden, who's the creator of Million.js, who's the creator of Sane.dev, and is an incredible builder who spent a lot of time building AI tooling for React that helps people optimize and build performance stuff, and is building at the forefront of some of the best UI UX generation you will see with LLMs. Then we have Josh, who's the founder of Coframe, a previous resident of AGI House. Didn't mean to blow your cover, but sorry. Josh is an incredible founder, and this is not his first rodeo. This is actually his second one, and the first one was a multi-billion-dollar unicorn, so he has great insights on how to take companies from 0 to 1, how to build incredible teams, and more importantly, how to build incredible products. And then we have Linus, who has built incredible AI interfaces, has some amazing insights about interfaces, who's currently an AI engineer at Thrive Capital. So we'll hear a little bit about what AI workflows and products exist inside of Thrive Capital. Linus was previously at Notion, and before that, he was at Replit. So there are some of the best AI companies out there today building some amazing, amazing products. And then we have Matt, who was the co-founder of Respel that is now part of Salesforce, where he spends a lot of time as a director on the AgentForce team. So we'll hear the journey of going from a startup to building for enterprises and building and deploying agents at scale. So with that, please help me welcome our incredible speakers onto the stage for the next panel. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Really appreciate it. I would like us to kick us off with kind of a very, very simple question. Can you guys share an experience of an AI prototype that you actually failed to productionize, that just didn't work? And why did it not work?
I've got a lot of them. So I think like the first one that comes to mind from me is when about a year into Respel. And so Respel was AI agents and workflows. A lot of people called it like AI first and easier to use Zapier. And we were pretty early on the scene, and we had a lot of license to build a ton of different product. When we were about a year in, we had this idea of we want to build this like all-in-one agent for enterprises, and it's going to connect with your CRM and your ATS and your cloud like object storage and all these other tools. And because we were very similar to, say, like a Zapier, we had integrations with I think it was like by that time around 80 to 100 different tools. And so we were building this agent out, and kind of like what we were talking about in the last panel, when you give an agent tons of tools and you give it very vague instructions like, oh, a user's going to ask you to do something, and you should probably go do it, it's really not a good idea. And we found that 2 things went wrong. One, on the technical side, it just didn't do the right thing at the right time with the right tools back to back. But then the harder thing was we didn't know how to guide users. And I think a lot of things I'm going to probably talk about during this panel is how do you get users to understand the product that you've built? Because that's just as important, if not more, than actually building it. If they don't know what questions to ask or how to use it, then it's probably going to fall flat on its face. And that's kind of what happened. We actually rolled back that product and never released it widely because even if we could solve the technical challenges, we didn't know how we were going to tell people what you're supposed to do with it and how to be successful and get actual value out of it. That's super interesting. Hey everyone, I'm Josh. I'm going to point to an example of a project that I built about 2 years ago. This is a project. It was my first real foray, I would say, into building apps that are focused on code generation. This project is called GPT Migrate. Some of you may have heard of it. It was at the time. I think it's a pretty interesting concept. The idea behind it was you could take a code base in one language or framework and migrate it to another using AI autonomously. So maybe one of the first examples out there of like a kind of fully self-driving coding agent with a very clear objective. What was challenging about it was the scope of the problem. So this worked okay with really small code bases, very like toy examples. And I think that's why it sort of got the initial popularity that it did. But there's this like efficient frontier of difficulty and value to solve. And while code migration is a very valuable problem to solve, it's actually an extremely difficult problem to solve. So even with that, even with today's models, in fact, we're still not there yet. So I guess I had a bunch of learnings within there, and I could talk about these ad nauseum about specific ways in which this broke. One of the things I'm sure a lot of you are focused on code generation. Code generation is really nuanced in most cases because you're dealing with other environments of which you don't have full control. There are a lot of really great, I think that the most successful AI apps out there so far, besides having human in the loop, have been where you have full control over something. So think about all the popular create an app from scratch from a prompt apps out there. They're really great, but they also have full control, and you can kind of like pre-bake in patterns and so on that are recognized. When you don't have that full control, it becomes a really messy problem. It's one of those I can't remember who coined this term, but wicked problems, like just like really, really hard problems to solve. If you solve them, it's amazing, but code migration is certainly one of them. So I guess I don't know if I would say it's a cautionary tale because it's great to explore these really hard problems, but to productionize, to make it actually useful, you do have to think about, what are the things that I might not expect from this domain, especially if I don't have full control over the problem space.
Everyone, I'm Linus. I'll talk about an example from my earlier time at Notion that actually has also come back to bite me more recently at Pride as well. When I first joined Notion, it was kind of late 2022, early 23. It was an interesting time because it was sort of the true Wild West of LLMs, where like this is forget agents. This is like pre-RAG, pre-chat completions API. The only tool you had available was a thing where you sent in some text, it would continue that text, and you had to like add the user and assistant tags manually. And also there's no like structured anything. You were just generating text and parsing it. But it was also a really creatively interesting time because no one really knew what anything was going to look like. I still think that's kind of true, but especially then, no one really knew what anything was going to look like. And so there was a lot of experimentation. In fact, on the Notion team, we spent a lot of the summer of 23 throwing stuff against the wall. One of the things that we were really excited about as a concept was some kind of an ambient experience for answering questions. We latched onto this idea very early that answering questions was an incredibly valuable use case for these systems. And if you're in a company of any moderate size, you know that so much time is wasted in Slack and email with people asking questions where the answer exists somewhere else in the company. And you can obviously funnel those people to your product to get them answered, but wouldn't it be so nice if something could just find those questions in Slack or in email and answer them automatically? And so we had this cool design for like an ambient experience in Slack where you say, anytime, a lot of companies have like an Ask Anything channel. And so wouldn't it be nice if when the system knew that it found the answer, it would automatically and ambiently reply and kind of watch the inbox. And we built a version of it sort of back on the back of the excitement we had about the design and the dream. And it was so annoying that we had to turn it off because of complaints, despite Simon, one of the co-founders, being directly involved in the project and pushing it up. And something similar happened at Thrive as well, where obviously there was a lot of other stuff that we built that people are really excited about, but this particular ambient experience where you try to have something that is self-aware about whether it's being useful or not. This is still proving to be very difficult. But it failed for a couple of reasons. One is, I think RAG systems are still quite bad at telling whether it's providing useful information or context or not. There's a fundamental tension between, when you're doing RAG, between whether an information is relevant and whether it is like high signal. So if you're retrieving over a news article, for example, a news story may be relevant if it's talking directly about the topic you care about, like it might mention the company you care about or the person you care about and have a lot of detail about exactly what's going on with those people. But it might not be reputable. It might not have the opinion that you expect. If some random kind of spammy article from the internet talks directly about what you care about, you might not care about that as much as an article that was written by an extremely reputable journalist or creator that maybe only sort of mentions it in passing, but it's very high signal opinion. Anyway, so relevance versus signal, the model not knowing whether it's providing actually useful information versus only relevant information was one thing. The other trouble was that, and this is, I expect a theme that's going to come up multiple times in this panel, is we had built this generality has a really real cost. In that if you're building general systems, you're kind of abdicating your responsibility to have an opinion about exactly what the user experience should be. And we had built the system on top of a very general rail where we could prompt this general system that was kind of available everywhere and able to read it from any of these tools. And then we were trying to sprinkle a little bit of prompting on top to get it to have these behaviors. And especially with the model capabilities of the time, that generality meant that we were really leaning very heavily on capabilities that weren't there yet. And we were also not as opinionated. We had this kind of a high-level idea of wouldn't it be nice if the model could do all of these things that a great human would do. But we weren't as opinionated, I think, as I think we could have been about exactly what kinds of questions we want to answer, exactly how would the system know whether it's being useful or not. How do we detect when when an answer is like how long should the answer be, all these things. And so one of my takeaways that I still carry with me to this day is like the more it's tempting to build general abstractions and general tools and infrastructure, but there's a real cost associated with it. And the more specific opinion you can be about workflows, it's much easier to build a system.
Hi, I'm Aiden. I used to build tools for React performance. The reason that is really important is because there's tons of e-commerce companies where if you can optimize the speed of execution or the speed of loading by X%, you can literally save hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And so you're like, hey, like there's this new thing called language models, and it seems pretty good at generating code. What if we can make it optimized code? So show of hands, who here uses like Cursor, Windsurf, or whatever to generate front-end code? It's pretty bad, right? Like you have to like prompt something and you look at it and it's like, hey, like why are there 15 use effects that are here? It's like causing infinite re-renders. So there's tons of problems with like language models generating code. So our initial approach was like, hey, if we had like a GPT-4 call and put in the context of the React code and said, optimize this, what would happen? Turns out it makes it slower. So then we tried more of a structured approach. So like, okay, if, language model can produce a wide distribution of choices and maybe like one or two of those choices are really, really good, what if we try to select out those? And so what we did was we basically deterministically labeled each of the potential problems that could occur. So I personally spent like 100 hours in a large enterprise code base. I know, it's terrible. Figuring out these problems and then trying to label them. And one of the things we found out was, first, it's still really hard to optimize performance. Like ultimately, like at scale, there are tons of different types of problems, tons of patterns, and it's hard to deterministically figure out each part. And also, like at the time, the models weren't capable enough to do this, and I don't know if they are without additional context. Ultimately, we gave up on the idea because scaling a system like this is pretty hard. And until someone can figure out either providing the right context or the right tools or systems to figure out these types of issues, then we'll have something actually that can solve our performance apps.
I hear a few different points. There were points about, hey, don't generalize your framework, your infrastructure. Think about very specifically in terms of problems. You need to give LLMs more context. Hey, there's some problems that are just too complex. and the domain is so big, so you might not actually be able to attack it. Other use cases of, it's not just about solving the problem, how are you going to get the end customer to understand that this can be done also is an important consideration to make. And in that theme of like going in the journey of going from the prototype to the product, I want to like break it down into a few more steps for us. So if you guys were to like take a step back and think about all the things you've built in terms of prototype journey into product journey, what are a few things, 2 to 3 things that come to mind? You're like, hey, these are the things I ask myself if I'm considering this prototype is worth productionizing. That can be true for a feature, that can be true for a workflow, that can be true for just an idea in general. And has that evolved over time? We all have worked with DaVinci models that were just spitting out text. Now we have MCPs working, so a lot more is possible today. So what are some first few questions that come to mind when you're trying to evaluate something as a prototype?
Yeah, I don't miss the DaVinci days, for the record. It's pretty painful to work with models back then. I see a lot of teams, when you're prototyping, you might launch it, you might not. It might just be like kind of a stopgap while you figure out what is possible versus not. And I think that that's really one of the key things here, where we're all building on the edge. We're using AI models that, if you ask your engineering team, hey, can we build like Rippling? Can we build Stripe? Like the answer would be yes, but how long do we have? But with AI models, sometimes you might ask them like, hey, can we build this? And the question is, I don't know. And you don't have that determinism to rely back on. You don't know exactly if it can be done with the level of quality that you need to actually deploy it to users and make them successful with it. So I see a lot of teams like doing like an accessibility or a feasibility check first thing. And that's essentially just prototyping. So that always comes first. Like figure out where the bounds of the LLM are and try to use real data from like as early as possible, because the data is what's going to make it, garbage in, garbage out. It's going to make it work. And if you're using fake data or mock data or synthetic data, you might not get the results you want. And then the next thing I do is figure out what data does it need and from where, and how do we need to architect that? Because there are too many, I would say, like schemas and sources for you to just plug into everything in a given time frame. And so if you say, I want to build like a chatbot agent and it helps developers read developer docs. Okay, so it needs to read the developer docs so it can do some RAG or something on it. Does it do it real time via web search? Does it index in the background? Like that's the stuff you should probably figure out beforehand, because how you build the AI to work with that data is going to depend on where that data is from and how fresh it is, etc. And then from there, it's just iteration. Like, I coming from startup world, going into Salesforce, it's a bit of a culture shift. The thing that gets me is I think there's still inklings of like waterfall methodology, and every like big company's like, oh, we're agile and et cetera, but like they have like a semi-agile, semi-waterfall structure in most cases. The tricky part is you just cannot waterfall AI. You don't know what's possible, what's going to work or not, and you keep going back to the drawing board over and over again. So those are like, I guess, like, two of the big things, one philosophical comment, but yeah, I'll move it on.
Just one thing I would love to double click on. What are some things you do internally for the feasibility testing?
It's hard to answer because it depends on the product. I mean, first thing is like, we were working towards the end of Respell on kind of a little side project for video understanding. And at the time, Gemini had just come out with, I think it was Gemini 2, and it was like the first video understanding model that could actually like take a video more than like 2 seconds. And we had to determine, okay, we were going to use it to watch screen recordings and take some info. So it's like, okay, can it understand text? Can it understand that the user is clicking around because the cursor is like really small? Maybe like the video model isn't going to see that. Is it going to be able to do temporal analysis? Like, what do they do over time on the screening? And like, you have a clue. And nobody else had like tried this before because it came out like a few days prior. So we had to just go in and we had to like screen record ourselves doing a bunch of different things and figure out like, okay, what is it going to pick up on? What's it going to mess up? What's it going to be like okay at? What can we tune the prompt to fix versus what's just blatantly not possible in the model? That's the kind of stuff that like you need to figure out. It's like where are the edges of where it's good or bad, and then just map it out so you don't end up trying to build a full product over a month or two, and then end up like, oh yeah, it actually does kind of suck at like the main thing we want it to do. Yeah, it was cool to see that model come out. We had a lot of fun playing around with session replays with the video analysis as well. It's actually pleasantly surprised with some of the stuff they could do sometimes. So I don't know if my framework has changed as much for this, but the framing around it has certainly shifted. There's a big pro and a big con that comes with AI when it comes to prototyping to production, right? I think everyone should still think about the same core things. From an ROI perspective, does this make sense for my business, what the use case, or the customers to bring into production? That's what should drive every decision at the end of the day. That's the North Star metric or the North Star objective to focus in on. And I think that doesn't change. The pro with AI, of course, is that you're able to get things out the door faster. And so what you're able to do on both a prototyping side and also a productionizing side is take into consideration a highly reduced cost of creation. If that makes sense, especially on the prototyping side. I'd say it's outsized benefit on the prototyping side. So that's important to keep in mind. It means that exploration is easier. That creates more optionality. That creates more, it creates more ideas and creativity and so on. The con of this that I think not enough people talk about that much is once you get something out there and start to really, it takes on momentum and so on, you've got to support it. And you've got to maintain it. And luckily, there are a lot of really great tools like Adaline that help us to maintain these things much more effectively. But supporting, like you write code once, you just have to like budget in your mind. Okay, this is going to be like 5x the effort to actually support this, for its lifetime, or whatever the multiplier is. And as AI gets better, it's going to be able to help with that too. But where I think have seen most of the benefit in AI from a weighting perspective, it's been more on the prototyping side. And so just having that like critical eye on what am I going to want to maintain over time is really important, because it gets so tempting to be like, oh, this is going to be such a cool feature. I just vibe coded it in 6 hours or in 2 hours and it's already really impressive, and like, let's just add it. But you got to think about like, okay, what's this going to mean for my code base and for my project and for my team longer term?
One of the benefits that we have, so Thriving Capital is not a traditional product company, and so I don't think most of you have used the thing that we make, because the TAM, I like to joke that the TAM for the product that I work on is like 70 people, because it's the total headcount of the company, and I've talked to literally every single potential customer of our product because they all are in the same building, and it's kind of a weird product, but one of the or a weird type of market to build in which to build a product. But one of the benefits of this is that you can be extremely concrete about exactly what problems you need to solve, because you can just walk up to them and look over your shoulder and see what work they're doing. And so this is a lot of the work that we do on my team of like 5 or 6 of us that build this product, the internal product at Thrive, is to spend time with our coworkers and see the work they do. And to the point of how do you know where to go from prototype to production, the problem that we run into is rarely that we don't know whether it's useful or up to par, because we begin with a very crisp understanding of here is exactly the kinds of questions you need to be able to answer, or here's exactly the quality of results you need to be able to deliver. Sometimes there are actually true human-written, not just human-written, but written by our teammates, gold standard answers you compare them to, so that the result bar is very clear. What's less clear is what is the right method. So we might try one kind of implementation idea, and it may get you kind of 80% there, and then you have to make the judgment call of, should we keep pushing on this, and should we try different models and optimize the prompts, or do we need to take a fundamentally different approach? And I think that is kind of an age-old engineering taste question, but at least if you start from a very opinionated, concrete set of use cases, as we have the privilege of doing, the question mostly just comes down to, do you think this is the right technical approach or fit? The other topic that I think both Matt and Josh brought up, and I also want to double down on because I think it's so important, is that when you're building an AI product, especially on top of these foundation models, you're actually building at two different levels. You're obviously building at the more obvious level of shipping some software artifact. And this is the same in traditional software, right? Like you build an app, a traditional app, and the app exists as a code base and a binary artifact that you ship to your customers, and it is what it is, and it has its own life out in the world, and the app is never really going to change unless you change the code yourself, and the way that people use your app changes fairly slowly, where in AI applications, both the underlying technology, the model capabilities and how you orchestrate them, and the capabilities that people expect out of your app are going to change all the time as people see what's happening in the ecosystem, and also as the underlying models powering your product change. And so when you're building an AI product, you have to obviously think of yourself as shipping the software artifact, but you also are building this higher level thing, which is a combination of the team and the process and the way that you continue to evolve the product. And that is, I think, a much more, like in the long run, how you build that dominates whether your product works and is successful and can keep up with the model capabilities advancing. And so, as Josh alluded to earlier, in addition to knowing and having an opinion on whether the current product is up to par, before you want to ship, you have to really make sure that you also can be confident that you can continue to evolve the product, and you're building the process, the observability, the way you understand your customers, how do you keep up, how are you going to iterate, how are you going to make sure that you can change the system and change the prompts with confidence. All of these things are also a part of the thing you're ultimately building, and you have to have confidence in that to ship something to production.
Yeah, I'm going to give a much less thoughtful answer. Matt, Josh, and Linus are incredibly experienced. We're actually a very young product team. What we've seen works for us is we see what works out, like on Twitter or Launch, and we try to replicate a similar version of that. So, for example, Same, which is a product that is able to create websites, apps, games online with AI. We actually forked Bolt, one of our competitors at the time. And so through that, we were able to figure out, hey, like, can we put an agent inside of Bolt? Can we actually have Bolt run in a real container online? Just keep iterating and figuring out what works and what doesn't. So we were actually like not very thoughtful in our approach. We tend to just throw stuff at the wall and see what works and see what we can iterate on. And if that works, we stick with it. So yeah.
Just to kind of build off of that, while your final question in the realm of prototypes, we live in a world that is just riddled with frameworks of how to call LLMs, how to structure agents, an agent framework A, agent framework B, that to some extent make it trivially easy to get started and build really cool things. Your guys' experience of building things, is that a reliable approach? Does that in the long run, when you transition into a product, help you still move faster? Or has the experience been otherwise?
One of my things when I started Respell was like, I'm not going to write code because I know I'm going to like fall in love with it and then, delay my other responsibilities. But I struggle. I've been working with code a lot recently now that I have some extra free time. And I struggle to see the benefit of a lot of the agent frameworks out there. They are very light wrappers, and there's really not like terribly much you can add on top for the like actual like base model tool knowledge part. It's the things that live outside of it, like the observability, the maybe like version controlling. It's the RAG or the knowledge or the MCP part of it. That part of it makes sense, but I can't speak too much to other types of frameworks. And I think like as things are advancing and like as context window sizes increase, we probably are not going to be doing RAG as much for because RAG has like at least in the beginning it had two use cases. It's like A, you're just searching over a giant data set and you need to return only the most relevant results, or B, you just have like a mid-sized data set and you can't fit everything into the context window. So it's like kind of a stopgap solution. But like if a context window increase drastically, I think Google's up to 2 million tokens. At some point we're going to be 10 or infinite maybe. If that happens, we might not need a RAG framework as much, or at least for that subset of the problem. I haven't played around too much with the other ones, so I'll yield that to the others. Yeah, I also haven't played around with too many frameworks. I don't have the time to do Asian framework surveys nowadays, but I do think that it like a sufficiently expressive framework that gives you nice abstractions that you can speed you up. It can be nice. We use LangGraph a lot at Coframe. I think it's nice. You do have to invest a little bit of time into getting to know it. So like being smart about how long is this going to be supported? Like what's the community around it? Who's the team behind it? Is important because you don't want to be rug pulled eventually. But I think it's also an interesting exercise in itself. I mean, I say this having not done it yet, but just seeing what I've done this in other areas. It's an interesting exercise in itself to go and evaluate other frameworks to figure out, what are the patterns that are working for other people? How can I apply this to my own work and what insights can I glean? That's just a general truism, I think, in most parts of life. Yep.
The short, maybe quick answer to the question that I'll elaborate on after I say the answer is, the short answer, I think, is if you want to adopt a library or framework, and this I think is true of software generally, not just AI, you want to be, you're kind of buying into someone else's model of the world, someone else's way to abstract over the hard parts of the problem. And you want to really be sure and have a crisp argument to yourself about exactly what problem that framework is solving for you. And if you're trying to take anything to production, which I think everyone should be doing, then the argument, the value that the framework provides for you that justifies adopting the cost of borrowing someone else's abstractions cannot be just that it helps you get started faster, because often that comes to bite you in the end. Before I find myself as an AI engineer in my previous life, I worked in this like corner of online and Twitter called Tools for Thought, where we like obsessed over having lots of opinions about note-taking tools, which is how I ended up at Notion. And one of my favorite memes in that corner of Twitter, which I don't actually know the like origin of the meme, but it was basically this meme that looked like a WikiHow image, and it was a guy holding a jar of pills. On the front of the pill, it says tough pills to swallow. On the back of the pill, it says all great tools must be built in a serious context of use. And this is such a tough pill to swallow for people like me, because it's so sexy to like think about questions like, what is the correct abstraction for thought? And like, what is the ideal document format? It's like kind of intellectual catnip. And you can have, like, I think humans have spent thousands of years thinking about questions like, what is the one true document format? And the real answer is like, it doesn't really exist. All useful document formats are domain specific. And obviously you can come up with some generalities, like rich text documents. Rich text documents are a thing that we use, and like Notion blocks are cool and tables are cool, but these innovations are very few and far between. And in general, if you want to build something valuable, you have to build something for a serious context of use, which means sitting down next to someone that's actually doing the work and trying to form a deep understanding of exactly why that problem is hard. And so frameworks, as I kind of noted earlier, when you're building AI products, you're building at these two levels. You're building the software artifact, and you're also building the processes and the how your team solves a problem and continues to evolve the system. And I think frameworks are useful only to the extent that they help you do both of these things. So if the frameworks helps you get to a prototype faster, maybe that helps with the first part, but then it may impose additional tax on your team for being able to evolve the system later, because you're borrowing lots of abstractions, heavy abstractions that you may not understand. And in general, kind of tautological truth about everyone that's very deep working on these frameworks is that if you're working on these frameworks, building these frameworks, you're not really working on understanding the serious context of use in which these products are going to apply. You have to do one or the other. And it's just, I think, especially early on in a field like this, it's good to have the serious context of use reality check you. And so I guess to maybe round out my answer, I think at Thrive, we're very careful about adopting frameworks or libraries or tools. A lot of what we build is homebrew, and tools like Cursor make it very easy to spin up little kind of internal tools and libraries and mini frameworks. And so we've mostly been on building things as we need it and building up our own infrastructure for being able to spin up new tools and libraries as we need it, rather than benchmarking like every piece of tool infrastructure that comes out.
Linus, I would like to double click on that. Can you share some examples of what are some things you've been able to build internally that check the mark of like, hey, there are tools that do this, but we built this internally, this was helpful for us. Or there are frameworks to do this, but we built this internally, that was helpful for us?
We have, there's this, I hate to be the guy who's like, you should read my blog post, but there's this blog post I wrote a long time ago that I think a lot of people like, that I think is relevant here, which is like, if you're building a product for many people, you have to pick one specific part of a workflow and then solve it for many people, because workflows are very varied across people. But if you're building for only one team or one product or one context, you can build a tool that exactly wraps around the workflow. And so we have this collection of features, or like, it's hard to even like pick a word for it, but we have a collection of things that we've built that together enable a bunch of workflows that, where the best way to describe it, I think, is a comprehensive log of every LLM completion that ever goes through any of our systems, a way to trace any one of those logs into a user request and a feature and a product surface where that originated, be able to play it back, be able to change something about the input and then like rerun it. And then also all of the thumbs up, thumbs down, comment reactions in any of our products gets tied to all of those request IDs. So what that enables us to do at a workflow level is, if someone is using one of our products and says, hey, this automatically generated meeting description or meeting prep doc or this automatically generated answer or lookup or report looks bad, they can thumbs down, they can add some context, and then we get a Slack ping that says, here's exactly what the user said, here's a link to the full logs filtered to this product surface in this view, and we can go in immediately, very quickly, debug from a single production error, be able to be able to replay it with a new prompt, be able to debug exactly what happened. And so it's not really a single like feature, but it's a collection of things that together enable that kind of a debugging workflow, which we benefit tremendously from.
Linus does have an incredible blog, by the way. You should check it out. Definitely.
I concur. Josh is saying Linus does have an incredible blog. You should check it out.
We depend on frameworks really heavily, but as Linus said, we've been bit in the ass by AI SDK way too many times. One of the great things about AI SDK is it covers many providers, right? Like you can use a model from OpenAI or a model from Anthropic or whatever. But each one of these model providers has very specific API constraints or requirements. Like the image must be this big or this size threshold or whatever. And as a consumer app where hundreds of thousands of people use it every single day, and when we the limitations of these frameworks, literally the hidden complexity or limitation of these frameworks literally prevents us from shipping. Or like when we ship things, they cause bugs. So I think like frameworks for language models today, or like any models today, are like we're in like kind of like a jQuery era. Like you can build like small, neat applications with jQuery or Backbone or whatever, but when you start to building really complex applications that really need correct UI, that is quite hard. So until then, we're going to still be patching and forking AI SDK to fix all the small, minute, random inconsistencies. But hopefully waiting for the day React comes and fixes all our issues. Fingers crossed.
I think one more thing to add to what Linus and Aiden were saying was, Linus, you were talking about like how, right, sure, it's like throwing me away.
I'm telling you, it was like Apple cuts.
They have their own mind. You were talking about how it's like downloading the framework reference or the context of the framework developer. And especially when things are moving so fast with AI and like a new model's out, and then, it supports a totally new multimodal capability or something like that. That frame of reference, that philosophy that they had might now be stale. And so I think early on with LangChain, they came out very early. It was like March of 2023. And we had no idea what multimodality would look like, what the format you pass these images or speech into. Voice models were not really like huge back then. I think Whisper had come out, like Whisper 1, but much like your DaVinci models, they had a very different schema. And so like you're locking yourself into like that frame of reference, and if it can't catch up fast enough, or it's just fundamentally not built for some new kind of capability, that can also hold you back too.
There are also ways in which the correct abstraction for the industry at large may not be the correct abstraction for you. If a lot of your industry depends, so like an interesting example is Thrive recently began exploring, like some members of our team recently began exploring more traditional businesses and ways to bring AI to those, like accounting and other services. And a lot of those workflows deal very heavily with documents, or like Word documents, PDF documents, sheets. These are like the core building blocks of a lot of workflows. And you like internally, we're still very early on this journey, but internally, like deeply embedding into these workflows, we may discover that the right way to structure LLM programs in this world may be totally different from things like the Responses API or the AI SDK, and it may be much more centered around documents and automatic workflows and batch jobs. And if you're building things in-house, you have a capability to build your own kind of world model around yourself rather than subscribing to someone else's. I'll also quickly add on to what Aiden said around kind of the gap between prototype and production. There's this really amazing talk that even if you don't go read my blog, you should definitely watch this talk. And it's by a gentleman named Brian Cantrell. The talk is titled something like software as a reflection of values. And the main thrust of the talk is that just as in your life, you may choose to prioritize one value over another and trade off, and different people may have values and virtues that are all good, but they may choose one over the other when push comes to shove. In software, it's the same. There are so many virtues that are all good. Performance is great. Being able to move quickly is great. Observability is great. Stability is great. But you can't have all of them at once all the time. And so different pieces of software choose different values. Node.js chooses approachability and performance, and maybe sacrifices some amount of stability and ability to reason robustly about the system, whereas something like Rust makes a different set of trade-offs. Similarly in frameworks, frameworks that are built for prototypers and built in that kind of culture and value set, which I think the Vercel AI SDK is representative of that set of values. The values aren't necessarily wrong, but they may be values that you may only want to adopt when you're prototyping and not want to adopt when you're going to production. Where in production, the values I think you probably want to care about are more like robustness, reliability, ability to see what's happening and understand your system, and when something happens, being able to debug your system. And so in those cases, you may want to subscribe to frameworks and models of the world that are built by people who show those values instead.
These are really good points. We've covered kind of a very huge gamut of things from, we talked about observability, how to understand user input. We've talked about performance, frameworks, not frameworks. I think one thing I would love for us to kind of double click on is shipping fast and trying not to break things. And how far can evals actually take a product from prototype to production? And if you guys have any experience setting up evals, and how has that evolved as the use cases within your product? They obviously always evolve as the use cases themselves have evolved.
I want to hear how Linus does. I think it's relevant to what you were talking about earlier. Like evals don't stop at production.
I guess these are like I have a pretty straightforward way of thinking about evals, which is that evals are kind of automation. The thing that evaluations automate is you as a human personally looking at every single user interaction. Again, going back to, not to like beat a dead horse, but going back to this mental model of like when you're building an AI product, you're building two levels, the software artifact and the team. If you really want, like such a key part of building this like team level process and capability to evolve the system is you want everything that you do with the product and with the way the users use your product to feedback into improving your team's understanding of why the tasks that you want your system to do is hard. Maybe it's because the data is really messy, maybe because there's these outlier use cases. Maybe it's because there's a cohort of your users who are using it very differently. Something. But it's very domain specific. And everything that you do in the eval process and in the user discovery process should improve and refine the resolution of the understanding of why your domain is hard for these generalized models. And one way to do that, obviously, is in an ideal world, every one of your engineers and product people would spend all of their day looking at real user interactions and why things were bad and what kind of mistakes the models made. I mean, like one of the ways that I tell really great AI engineers is they have such a crisp understanding, not just of who their users are and what the problems are, but of like all the weird idiosyncratic ways the model fails. So like Kevin earlier talked about the problems with like sometimes time zones are really hard and sometimes picking the right event is hard, but sometimes it turns out you can actually like set the window from like, plus or minus 30 days or 60 days, and that is actually just fine. And that's a way to like make the task easier for the model. That kind of high resolution understanding of your task domain is what you want. But unfortunately, both for security and privacy reasons and also for just logistical reasons, you can't have all of your engineers spend all of their days just looking at production logs. And so evals are an automation layer on top of that. But automation, you always lose some amount of resolution, right? So like when I was building a part of building RAG systems at Notion, one of the kind of proxy signals that we used for did the model answer a question, like did the model find an answer, was the number of citations that was included in the answer. Because that doesn't require us to look at the answer. It doesn't require us to see individual responses. You can aggregate over that statistic and you can say, 30% of answers had no citation. And that's like a proxy signal for whether the model thought it answered the question or not. But it's proxy because it's not actually the ground truth of whether the model answered the question. The model could also have no citations for other reasons. It could have just like forgotten to cite. It could have like gotten the wrong syntax for that citation feature. It could also, alternatively, the model could have hallucinated a citation that isn't actually relevant to its answer. And so the automation helps scale your engineers and your product people understanding the domain, but I think ultimately you still have to treat it like an automation. And the point of the automation is only to scale it. And you have to always keep in mind that there's going to be a gap between what the automation, the leverage of the automation of the evaluation gets you and the actual like, true understanding of the domain that you want to have.
Thank you, guys. All those insights, and completely agree. This is what we also see with a lot of customers that we work with. Evaluations end up becoming domain specific. And what we like to say about evaluations is they're a good measure to also prevent regression. They don't help you build magical products. And that comes from that higher resolution understanding of what is the product actually being used for? And what are people doing with your product? I wish we had more time to go through a lot more things that we wanted to talk about, but I really want to open the room for some questions so people can also ask some things from the amazing speakers we have. So we'll take questions now. Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious when you work with like enterprise customers, I think they have a very high bar for standards of what they're willing to watch. And so I want to understand like how you as a company about, what features are paid for these enterprise testers, and then also how do you convince those customers to actually adopt those features?
I work with a lot of enterprise customers. Yeah. It's interesting. I'm trying to think of like the general case here because it totally depends. Like there are some enterprise customers that are just like rabid for any kind of AI. It doesn't matter what it is, and they just want it in ASAP. And like obviously that comes from top down, and they're checking a box. But then there's other customers who they come in with use cases ready. They have like the expertise to do it. Like they might want to automate something they're already doing today, getting the cost center like support or some kind of ops use case. And then there's other companies that usually in like regulated or compliant industries where they're like super skeptical, but they also kind of want to like tease AI a little bit. It totally depends. And so the first thing that we do is we talk at length with their team on like, do you have an idea and like experts, like one or two people who are like basically the carbon copy of what the AI is going to be. Because if you are trying to automate your customer support and kind of going back to the last question is like evals will get you pretty far, but also the first thing I recommend is you do the job yourself. If you're building a product, there's like, it's the resolution of that like knowledge that you really want to zone in on. Humans are great at generalizing. And if you are trying to automate like a support chatbot, you should probably do it yourself first because you can start to think about, I can see how the AI might miss this or how it might mess up here or what its limitations are going to be. So going back to enterprise use cases, first thing is you got to get those experts in a room with like design and engineering and figure out, okay, what is the actual solution they want? Because a lot of times they don't know. And this is a huge thing at Respell where whenever we were selling to upper market, especially towards the second year, the most common thing we got was, your product's so cool, we want to use it, it looks great, what do we use it for? Which is a very confusing question to get as a founder, because, I would love to say, I feel like that's your job, but you do kind of have to like understand that super in depth, and then you have to work with them in terms of like, okay, what can you do, what can you not for various enterprise constraints? Maybe it's too expensive to query over their entire CRM, or maybe or like ingest their videos where all their data is, or maybe it is too difficult to integrate with some systems, or it's regulated in some way. And I don't like, with the general case, it's very difficult to say like what is the like easy 1, 2, 3 step process, but you do have to have like those experts in a room, the people that you're replacing or augmenting, and engineering and design, because it all comes together at once. I'm glad to talk about more specifics.
Nice. Whenever I talk about this with people, I like to use this analogy of self-driving cars and the journey we took to get there. So self-driving cars, you start at level 0, right? It's like fully manual. Level 1 is something akin to cruise control. Level 2 is steering correction on highways, and then so on and so forth until you get to Waymo, or maybe beyond Waymo, where there's not even windows or whatever you're fixing each other. It's fucked. You magically get there.
To being in an elevator.
Yeah, like the Willy Wonka magic elevator thing. Yeah. So that tends to give people the right framing, because I think with working with big companies and enterprises, and it's not just about the tactics, it's also about the politics, and it's also about like, am I going to get a slap on the wrist or fired for bringing something like this in? It's all about framing and making sure that we're addressing objections. That tends to help. In our domain, I think it's useful for what we're doing, which is basically like growth experimentation for website optimization. We have the privilege of operating in a domain where everything that we produce can go through a layer of their human approval without going live and without being a bottleneck, because it doesn't take that much effort to approve. The overwhelming majority of the work goes in creating the stuff, and so as a result, we get to automate that, and all they have to do is approve. So if there is a way that you can, in your application, get them to approve and give a gold stamp, whenever something fortunately goes up the door, that's awesome. I think that's great. I fully acknowledge there are a lot of use cases where that's simply not possible, customer support being one of them, and that sort of like live IRL type stuff. That's where evals are going to become extremely important. But at the end of the day, I think you need to paint a picture and frame it as, here's how self-driving cars had to evolve. And oh, by the way, like the world is going to look like this. So people who are able to navigate that effectively are going to come out on top. And it would behest you to work with a partner, i.e. us, to help you navigate to that feature. Like, it's not a matter of, is this important to navigate? Yes, it is important to navigate. It's just about figuring out the most optimal way to do so. So it's all about framing, at least as far as I've experienced. Yep.
You might even say co-framing with your Orchestra. I'll add one small note, which I think might be relevant to this, which is around how you factor tasks. So I actually really love the self-driving example, but I think another thing that shows us is that how you divide a task that may seem monolithic into subtasks that have clear boundaries between the interfaces between human and the automation is important. I think often we're so used to being in the habit of thinking just in the dimension of capability, where you say, here's a task end to end, how well can the thing execute that task end to end reliably? And oftentimes you run into technological limitations of exactly how good you can make that system. But if you divide it up into subtasks where the delegation is and the boundary is clear, which is the key part, you can often exceed that. So in the like self-driving case, a silly example might be like, imagine that came to you and I was like, I have a self-driving car, but like it mostly just does the like steering wheel part. Like it's superhuman at steering the car, but like you have to press the gas pedal yourself. That would be incredibly hard to use, and probably the net human plus AI combined system would not be a very good driver. It would probably be a subhuman driver, even though you have a superhuman like steering system. more seriously, I learned about this fairly well-known result in kind of AI and economics recently, where in radiology, which is one of the parts of the medical practice that has seen a lot of automation, there's a fairly well-known result where if you combine a human radiologist plus an automatic diagnostic system that tells you the model's guess for whether a particular diagnostic is true or not. If you have the model separate and the human separate, they perform at some certain bar. And then if you give the human access to the system and its result, and then have the human then modify their claim based on what they see from this automation, the performance actually goes down because the human doesn't have a great sense of, the human isn't well calibrated to the kinds of mistakes that the models can make. But you can refactor this task of diagnostic where you can have the model, instead of outputting a probability of a diagnosis, you can have the model point out areas of the image where the model thinks there might be an issue where the human might want to pay attention to. And if you factor the task out differently, the combined system actually performs much better. And so I think in a lot of enterprise use cases, often the customer tells you, here's the workflow that we care about automating or making more efficient. And the sort of instinctive inclination might be to like, okay, how do we build some agent that can do this end to end? When in fact, the kind of product muscle that you can bring to that situation is to say, okay, here's the end-to-end thing, but maybe this is too hard. And actually, we can just have a model output this intermediate artifact or this explanation or this guide or this like copilot output, and the human can do the rest. And then that can save a meaningful amount of time and still deliver really great quality results.
Thanks, Linus. Please help me thank all of our wonderful speakers on this panel. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.